And welcome back to my channel. My name is Sarah and today I am here to film the mid-year book Freakout tag. This is one of my absolute favourite videos to watch on other people's channels, so I'm really excited to be doing this for the first time this year. I just think it's a really good way to get a good overview of everybody's reading year and sort of pick out the highlights and some of the lowlights. So yeah, without further ado, before I go into the main questions, I thought I would go over some of my reading stats for the year. So this year so far, it is the 23rd of June when I'm filming this, so we're like almost at the halfway point of the year. This year so far, I've read 59 books, which is pretty good. Like, I think I will at least finish another book before the end of the month. So that's on average 10 books a month, which I'd say is probably the most I've ever read at the halfway point of the year. For the last maybe like 3-4 years, I've averaged around about 100 books a year. So yeah, I'm like ahead of schedule, and I don't feel like I've just been reading books to get my numbers up. Like I've not been thinking about that, so that's really good. My top three moods are reflective, challenging, and emotional. That's not really surprising. I think I read quite a lot of slower sort of literary type books and classics, so yeah, that doesn't really surprise me. And then 63% of the books that I have read are slow paced, which again is not particularly surprising, and only 3% were fast paced. And when I looked at the ones that were fast paced, like, I don't know if I agree. It said that Sylvia Plath's poetry collection is fast paced, which I'm not sure about. Then the top five categories of books that I had were classics, literary, historical, memoir, and contemporary. It's not really particularly surprising. I'm surprised that classics is the top. I would say that I read quite a mixture, but not mainly classics, so I guess maybe they're counting modern classics as classics. And then my most read authors for the year, I only have two authors that I've read more than one book by. So I've read 7 books by Anthony Powell. I'm reading his 12-book series, A Dance to the Music of Time. I think that's right. And yeah, I've read 7 of those so far this year. So yeah, that he's won by a mile. The only other author I've read more than one book by is Enrique. I've read 2 out of the 4 books in his autobiographical sort of memoir series. So again, yeah, not surprising. I don't star rate my books, so yeah, I don't have an average star rating, but I would say that so far this year has been a very good reading year. Then I had a little look myself. This story graph doesn't tell you this, because I wanted to see how many books I'd read that were written in English and how many were translated. I feel like I read quite a lot of translated fiction, but when I looked at it, it said that I'd read 15 translated books, meaning that there are 44 books, yeah, that are not translated, which is quite surprising. I think because I'm trying to read all of the books on my TBR that like I've had for since before the start of the year, a lot of them are books that I bought a longer time ago, so most of them are written in English originally, so maybe that's skewing it a little bit. And I've read 29 books by women and 30 books by men, which I'm pretty happy with. I think sometimes because I read some older books, I worry that I end up reading a lot of sort of male white authors, so it's good to see that without making any concerted effort, I'm pretty much reading 50-50. So that's good. So I'll just go into the questions. So the first question is, what is the best book you've read so far in 2024? This was a really tricky question to answer. I had like 4 or 5 I could have picked from, but I decided to go with The Periodic Table by Primo Levi. This is the second Primo Levi book that I read, and this is short stories, and I wouldn't say that I normally love short stories at all, but there's something about his writing in this, it's just incredible. Um, these are all stories about his time working as a chemist. He was sort of like a professional chemist for all of his life. Even after he became a very famous author, he was still working in a sort of factory as a chemist. And so there are bits of this when he was training as a chemist, and then when he goes to Auschwitz, he manages to sort of do some of the less intensive physical work because he's a trained chemist. So there's a little bit of discussion about that. And then there are stories about the various different jobs that he's done as a chemist since then. So it was just really fascinating. They're sort of just little snippets from his life. Each story, the characters were just really quirky, and I'm not really like, I'm not a scientific person at all. I've basically never studied chemistry, but it was a good level for me where I felt like it was really interesting and I was learning lots of little bits and pieces, but it also didn't go over my head. So I really, really would recommend this one. If you've read anything by Primo Levi and you like his writing style, like, it's so good in this. So I would definitely say that this is my favourite book so far this year, and this was translated from the Italian by Raymond Rosenthal. So yeah, highly recommend. So the next question is, what is the best sequel you've read so far this year? As I said, I have been reading Anthony Powell's A Dance to the Music of Time series. The fact that I have read 7 books this year out of, so I read 8 in total. I read the first one on like the 30th of December last year, and then the other 7 I've read so far this year, so like that just shows that I've really enjoyed them. This series is sort of following a boy throughout his life. So at the start he's in high school, and then I think it ends in the 1970s. It starts in the 1910s, 1920s, so it really does follow the span of someone's life. The point I'm at just now is book 9, and there it's during World War II. But yeah, the second book in the series was A Buyer's Market. I don't know if that's my favourite out of the series. I'd say that they're all like very solid reads. These are sort of like high society books. There are lots and lots of characters that weave in and out. It's sort of gossipy, but also the writing's still really beautiful. Each book has sort of 4 or 5 chapters, so you follow 4 or 5 scenes throughout the course of maybe like a year in the narrator's life. The narrator is a very similar type of character to the author, I think. You know, he is also an author in the book. He's about the same age that the author would have been at that time, so I'm assuming it's semi-autobiographical, and there are characters that just weave in and out the whole way through the books, so it's been a really good experience. I think reading them in quite quick succession is a really good way to do it, because you can remember all of the characters from previous books, and when they pop back in you're like, oh yeah, that's that person. So yeah, this has been a great experience this year, so I'd highly recommend picking this series up. The next question is new releases you haven't read yet but want to. I don't read loads of new releases, but there are actually a few that I've not got to yet. So I made a video of my summer TBR, and one of the books on that is You Dreamed of Empires by Alvaro Enrigue, which is a new release, I believe. I think it was longlisted for the International Booker, and it is about the court of Montezuma, the last Aztec, I think, sort of high priest, and when the conquistadors arrive. It's sort of like a political intrigue type book. I've read his previous book, Sudden Death, and really loved it, so I'm really hopeful that I'm going to love this one. And then sort of, I'm always interested when books have won prizes, so I would be interested in reading Brotherless Night, which just won the Women's Prize for Fiction, and also Doppelganger, which won the Women's Prize for Non-Fiction. I have Doppelganger reserved on my library app as an audiobook, and I've been waiting for a very long time for it. I think I'm 3rd or 4th in the queue now, so I'm hoping that it will come in soon, well, hopefully before the end of the year at least. So that's one I'd like to get to. And then also I heard Simon over at Savage Reads really rave about Glorious Exploits, which is a book, a sort of a historical fiction set in ancient Greek time, which I read like none of the Greek mythology retellings. It's just something that doesn't really interest me, but when I heard him and his mum Louise Savage over at Louise Savage Muses talk about this book, it just sounded amazing, so I really want to pick that one up as well. And then the next question is most anticipated releases for the second half of 2024. I don't really have any. As I say, I don't read loads of new releases, and I like to wait and get people's reviews before I spend money on new books. So I know that there's a new Murakami coming out, which again, I'll wait and see what people are saying about it. I do like a lot of Murakami's work, but not all of it, and not some of his more recent stuff, so I'm going to wait and see. And yeah, apart from that, I'll wait and see what's maybe longlisted for the Booker Prize, wait and hear people's reviews before I pick anything up, so I'm not really sure. And then the next one is biggest disappointment of the year. There are a couple of books that I could have picked for this. The first one that I have picked is The Art of Joy by Goliarda Sapienza, I think is her name. I DNF'd this book. It's about 600 pages long and I DNF'd it at 400 pages, which is so ridiculous. I just kept thinking it was going to get better and then it didn't. This was a book that is on my physical TBR, and I'm trying to read all of the books of that this year, so it was a book I was definitely going to get to. I picked it up, I think brand new, in a bookshop a couple of years ago, and I just knew that it was a female Italian author and that it sort of spanned someone's life throughout the early 20th century. It was meant to be a character that was sort of morally grey, and I thought that sounded really interesting, but the way this book was written I really didn't like. So at the start you're sort of following this young girl, and it does seem like she's sort of morally grey. She doesn't really seem to like her mum and her sister. She has no real remorse when bad things happen to people. She goes to a convent. She becomes quite sex obsessed. And then after that she is sort of adopted by this rich family. What I didn't like about this was that within a chapter, years would jump on. So she'd be having a conversation with someone, and you would think that the conversation was continuing, and then she would reference like 2 years ago, but the stuff she's referencing was what was happening at the time of the conversation when the chapter started. So it's like you were jumping through time in the one conversation. And I just started to find it quite confusing. Because of that, there was no sort of emotional reaction by anyone to any of the events of the book. You know, people were dying and you didn't even really know that they had died, and then it was like, oh well, when he died 5 years ago. So you sort of were like missing any emotional connection to any of the characters because of that. So yeah, I DNF'd that one. That was quite a big disappointment. The other one that was a disappointment just because my expectation for this book was so high is The End by Knausgaard. This is the last book in his My Struggle series, and I like absolutely loved the first 5. This book is like the longest out of the series. It's about 1200 pages almost. And I was really excited for it. Like, I really love his writing. I find all of those things that he talks about really interesting, but what I didn't realise about this book, which is probably my mistake, is that there is like a 500-page Hitler biography inserted into the middle of it. So, you know, if you know anything about Knausgaard, he writes autofiction. It's all about his life. I've invested a lot of time learning about his life, and so I was wanting to find out how he finished off the series. And the bits of this book that weren't the Hitler autobiography, I absolutely loved. But I just didn't want to read a 500-page Hitler biography in the middle of what I thought was going to be a book about Knausgaard. So yeah, I think I could have done a bit of research and found out that that was in it, but I did want to finish the series, and I still like overall really enjoyed this book. It's just the Hitler part I could have done without. It seemed out of place. So that was definitely a bit of a disappointment. Then the next question is the biggest surprise of the year. So there are a couple of books for this. The House of the Spirits by Isabel Allende is probably my favourite book I read in May, and I just thought I wasn't going to like this book. It had been on my bookshelf for so long, and one of the reasons, which I know is really superficial, that I thought I wasn't going to like it is the font. Like, sorry, this font is just, I just hate it. I know that is really stupid, but anytime I picked it up I would read like a page and I'd be like, no, I just can't, and it was because of the font. But also this book was compared to 100 Years of Solitude, which is a book that I appreciate but didn't love. But this is like, for me, much slower paced. You spend much more time with the characters. This is Isabel Allende is a Chilean author. This book follows 4 generations of family, mainly from the female protagonist's point of view, and it sort of follows the first maybe 50 years of, maybe more than that, maybe like 70 years of the 20th century in Chile. I loved all the characters in this. It was definitely very character driven. The language was really beautiful. There were little bits of magical realism sort of scattered throughout it. I wasn't sure that I loved magical realism, and I don't love 100 Years of Solitude, so I was like a little bit unsure of this, so this was a huge surprise and I really enjoyed it. And then the next one that was surprising, sort of, is Travels with Herodotus by Ryszard Kapuscinski. I have read his book In the Shadow of the Sun or something, which is all about his time reporting in Africa. The reason why I thought I wasn't going to like this book is that it's a lot about Herodotus, and as I said, like I don't read any Greek myth retellings. I don't know much about classical texts and history, and so I thought that this might go a bit over my head. But this book, he basically, when he starts off as a journalist and he starts reporting in different countries, he takes along the histories by Herodotus with him to read. And so this book is sort of essays about his time in different countries as a journalist, and then it's sort of retellings of some of the stories from the histories and putting it into context of what he's doing at the moment. So at points like he's in Rwanda and he's sort of relating some of the things that happened in the histories to the situation in Rwanda. But as much as this was, at points he was basically just rewording some of the stories from the histories, like I was fascinated by this. When I finished this book, I went to check and see if my library had a copy of the histories, and then I was like, no, I don't actually think I do want to read it. But the fact that I thought I wasn't interested in Herodotus or in any sort of Greek history, and he made me want to pick that up, was very surprising. And yeah, I just loved this book. My new favourite author probably has to be Anthony Powell. As I say, I read the first book by him on the 30th of December last year, so he's like a very new author to me, and I've read 8 of his books, so yeah, I think he wins. A lot of the books I've read apart from that I've absolutely loved, I have read from the authors before. I've not read any Isabel Allende before, but I've only read one of her books, and I'm not sure that I'm like super excited to pick up any of the other ones. They're sort of, this plots don't sound as interesting to me, so I don't really feel like I can class her as a favourite author, whereas Anthony Powell, like I read 8 of his books, so definitely a favourite author. New fictional crush. I do not read any books that have any characters that I could possibly have a crush on. I couldn't think of a single answer for this, so instead I'm going to go with some of my least favourite characters, or sort of most despicable characters. The first one is from The Slaves of Solitude by Patrick Hamilton. This book, I was like almost in a reading slump, and it was so fast paced and just like gossipy. I just sort of, I got immersed in it. And one of the characters in this, so this is set in a boarding house in London during the Second World War, sort of just after the Blitz, or after the first Blitz. And it follows this sort of 40-year-old woman who's single, and just her relationships with the different characters in this boarding house. And there were 2 characters in this that I really did not like. One of the boarders in the boarding house, called Mr. Thwaites, is just like the worst character ever. So the way he speaks is so infuriating. He's so misogynistic. He really doesn't like the main character, so he's always sort of making like quips to try and put her down, and I was making my blood boil. So he's definitely like the most despicable character. Then the other book that I really didn't like some of the characters in, but in a good way, you weren't meant to like them, is The Sheltering Sky by Paul Bowles. This is a book that's set in sort of northern Africa, Morocco, in the Sahara, just after World War II, and it follows a married couple and their friend who go out there to sort of travel around just after the war. The husband in this, I really didn't like. Again, he's sort of misogynistic and just a bit of a pain. And then there's another character that they meet in a boarding house, that like a hotel, who's just so annoying. So annoying, and he's like trying to steal their stuff. He's just a pain. So yeah, both of them I really didn't like, but I think you're not meant to like them. So I would recommend this book. This was also a surprise. My dad had got me this, and it wasn't a book I'd ever had any real interest in picking up, but it was really atmospheric, and it sort of has stuck with me since I read it. New favourite character probably has to be Lucy, from Lucy by Jamaica Kincaid. This is a book about an au pair from Antigua who goes to New York to live with this really rich family, and it's just her internal monologue is so relatable. She's sort of very disdainful of other people, but she also has quite a lot of humour with it. You sort of learn why she is the way she is, and it all makes a lot of sense. But I just really loved being in her head and hearing her commentary on these rich people, and just sort of on society, feeling a bit disillusioned. Yeah, I just thought she was a really great sort of well-rounded character. A book that made you cry. I don't actually think I've cried any books this year. I don't read, like, if I know that a book is meant to be really sad, I will probably avoid it just because I cry at pretty much anything. But a couple of books that I was close to crying at. The first is Stillborn by Guadalupe Nettel. This book is about motherhood, about complications in motherhood, sort of medical complications, as the title suggests, which I sort of struggle with. It was very sad, it was very gloomy. I didn't actually cry, but I could have. So that's one. And then the other one is The Instant by Amy Liptrot. This is a sort of memoir. I've not read the first part of the memoir, which is the outrun, where she's trying to overcome her alcohol addiction, and she moves, or she's from Orkney, she goes back home to Orkney. I've not read that part. This part, she moves to Berlin, and she sort of gets involved with a man who maybe turns out to not be the best. I just found it really touching and sad at points, the way that she describes loneliness in this big city, trying to start over after, you know, having some difficulties in her life. I just found really touching. I didn't actually cry at this, but again, I could have. A book that made you happy. I don't really read a lot of happy books, but I'd say that Walk Through Walls by Marina Abramovic made me really happy just because of the reading experience. Marina Abramovic is a performance artist, and this is her memoir. It came out a few years ago, but I listened to the audiobook when I was on holiday, and I was sort of like, I was on holiday with my friend, but I went out for some runs in the morning by myself, and I was just like, we went to Rotterdam and then Amsterdam, so I was like out running listening to this audiobook. She narrates it. English isn't her first language. She's I want to say Serbian, and so she has this like very strong Eastern European accent, and just some of the way that she narrates some of it, I just found it sort of was making me chuckle. She's very blunt with things, and her life is fascinating. So just overall, this experience was great. Like, I read it when I was on holiday, and the audiobook experience was so good, so I'd highly recommend. The most beautiful book you bought this year. I'm not sure. I don't really buy beautiful books because I would say that I buy pretty much all of the books that I own secondhand, but a sort of old edition of a book that I do really like is Memoirs of a Dutiful Daughter by Simone de Beauvoir. This is like a penguin orange edition, but I just really like the sort of graphic design on the front cover. This is part one of Simone de Beauvoir's autobiography series. So this is a memoir about her growing up and about her going to university and meeting Sartre for the first time. I'm really fascinated by her life, and this was a really great read as well. But I just really like the sort of classic simplistic style of this. And then the last question is, what book do you need to read before the end of the year? So as I've mentioned, I am trying to read all of the books on my physical TBR that I owned before the start of the year. I had 60 at the start of the year. I've now read 30 of them, or DNF'd some of them. So I have 30 left to read. So all of those. But I'd say out of those, one of the books that is a high priority, but I'm also putting off because it's very long, is Solitude by Mircea Tarescu, who is a Romanian author. I've like started this book a couple of times, but the writing is really tiny. It's like a very big book, like compared to this book, it's huge. But I think it's going to be amazing. This is definitely like a maximalist type book. It's a school teacher and just all of his thoughts. I think it's going to be quite existential, and yeah, maybe a bit of a tricky read, but I think I'm going to really love it. So this is definitely one that I'm going to prioritise before the end of the year. So yes, those are all the questions in the mid-year book freakout tag. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and yeah, I can't wait to watch other people's videos of these. I've already seen some out already, and yeah, it's just like one of my favourite videos of the year, so I hope you've enjoyed.